Yesim, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really excited about today's conversation because I know it's going to resonate with a lot of people. So, my first question for you is to start thinking about if someone's thinking about leaving their job, what sort of things should they be considering?
Oh, you're starting with a nice, easy question there. That's a really good question, and there's a very, very long-winded answer to that. Obviously, you can appreciate that I obviously talk about this day in, day out, and I could probably give you a monologue for about 3 hours on, what helps people decide whether they're ready to quit and embark on a new career journey or not. So let me see if I can put this really succinctly. I think we all have bad days in the office, so to speak. Even if you don't work in the office, we all have bad days at work where we think, I've had enough, I'm out of here, I'm just going to quit and see what happens. And part of the reason I wrote my book, Ready to Quit Your Job, big question mark on the front cover, is because I really wanted to make sure that people, when they do quit, they've done it having thought through all the consequences and made the decision with a really clear head and, if possible, a bit of a strategy. So it's not just a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, I've had a really bad day, my boss has really annoyed me today. So one of the things I would definitely advocate is to spend time to really analyze whether quitting your job is, in fact, the right thing to do. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we just get ourselves into a position where we don't enjoy our jobs, and it could be for so many different reasons. It could be that you don't like your boss, you're not in a team that shares the same values as you. It could be that your organization doesn't share the same values as you. It could be that, maybe you are being paid less than you feel you should be. And that's always that niggly thing. I speak to a lot of people that say, I deserve to be paid more money for whatever reason. And I think once you have that mindset, it's very difficult to then be the best at your job or turn up in the best possible way, because you've always got this slight resentment hanging over you. So I did warn you, Simon, that I could go on a rant and I could talk for 3 hours. So just stop me. I don't know. Do you have another question that you want to jump in with? Because otherwise, literally, I'll just sit here and talk about why people end up in the wrong jobs and why sometimes people leave the right job.
You're passionate. I love it.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah, gosh. I know there's a framework you've been thinking about as well. So I'm happy for you to weave it in however you wish to. I think anyone listening and they're thinking at this stage, I've had a bad day. And I suppose it's an interesting thing to consider. Are you having a bad day, or is this turned into a bad career or a bad job or something that just doesn't serve you or fit your purpose anymore? I mean, I love what you said there. It could be just a simple misalignment of values. Maybe you feel like, you're not getting on with your manager. I mean, a lot of what I've read and understood is that, a very high percentage of people leave managers, not necessarily jobs. And it could just be that. So maybe there's opportunity to move elsewhere within the organization. It's a really tricky one. I know it's so tricky, but
Yeah.
I'll let you continue, because I think you've got some great nuggets to share.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes, so the framework that you referred to, so I always, when I first started working as a career coach or career change coach, I held a possibly slightly naive belief that whoever I worked with would end up leaving their jobs and finding a new career. And then as time went on and I worked with more and more people, and some people ended up staying in their roles, I felt like I was failing them. And it wasn't until a bit later on when actually the people that ended up staying in their current jobs would then reach out to me 3 months later, 6 months later, and say, do you know what? I'm so glad I worked with you, because I have this newfound appreciation of my work, and things have just it really improved in my current situation. So I'm so glad that I didn't quit when I was thinking about it. So recently, for example, I've been working with a teacher. I work with lots of teachers. Unfortunately, it's a mass exodus, unfortunately, out of teaching at the moment. I was working with a teacher who was really on the cusp of handing in his resignation, was really unhappy, very burnt out, very stressed. And we worked together for a few weeks, after which he decided, actually, he, like a lot of teachers, he'd gone into the profession with all the right intentions. He really felt passionately that he wanted to make an impact on young people's lives. He loved what he did and actually was really good at what he does. And so he decided to stay. And then a few weeks later, he messaged me and he said, "Do you know what? I've just applied for a head teacher role." And then lo and behold, he was offered the head teacher role. So he's now moving into a head teacher role. So we've sort of gone the whole, from wanting to quit teaching altogether to being all in and being a head teacher. And in his words, he couldn't be happier. So yes, so I talk about the framework. So now I talk about the 4 possible outcomes of working with me or reading my book or going through my programs. So you're either going to be a Remainer. So a Remainer is somebody who basically has a bit of a mindset shift and has a newfound appreciation of the work that they're doing, and I guess reconnects with their reason for choosing that profession in the first place, or choosing that organization, or choosing, whatever it might be. And so then they turn up to work in a renewed way, in a refreshed way, in a way that is much more positive and noticeable by, the people that they work with, their manager, and so on. So one lady I worked with was the perfect example of that. She went back to work after a few weeks with just a new level of confidence, I would say. And it didn't go unnoticed. And people then started to invite her to work on different projects that she wouldn't have been involved in otherwise. But because she was turning up as like the best version of herself, is the only way I can say it, she started to get noticed more. And then, so that's the Remainer. So that's somebody that decides, actually, I'm in the right place, I'm in the right organization with the right people, and I actually really like my job. And then you've got the Tweaker. So the Tweaker is somebody that goes, actually, I am in the right organization. I do like my colleagues. I quite like the boss that I'm working for, but I'm working 5 days a week. And if I just had one extra day a week where the kids are at school and I just had a day to myself to, invest in some self-care, or I don't know, look after the household chores, or meet up with friends, or whatever it might be, then that would make my life so much better. So you make that little tweak, or it might be that you want to take more responsibility at work, or you want to take less responsibility at work. Maybe you're good at your job, but you don't enjoy being a manager, let's say. So you might have that conversation with HR or your line manager to say, I suck at being a manager. Can I just carry on doing my work? But can somebody take on managerial responsibilities? And so making those little tweaks can make a massive difference to how you feel about work. So so we've got Remainer, we've got the Tweaker, then you've got the Toe Dipper. And the Toe Dipper is somebody that goes, there's loads of elements of my job that are actually really good, and it pays good money and blah, blah, blah. But I know that eventually I want to be doing something different in a different industry, a different role, etc. And so what the Toe Dipper does is start going out and exploring, what needs to be done to be able to move into the chosen profession. So it might be doing an evening course to get extra qualifications. It might be volunteering in a certain area. It might be starting a side hustle, so starting a little business on the side. So that's the Toe Dipper, and I've got so many examples of people who've done that. That's like I would say that's the really safe way to extract yourself from your current role into something that you've ultimately going to find more fun, more fulfilling, etc. And last but not least, we've got the Leaper. So that's somebody that goes, I've looked at my situation. There's nothing I like about it. None of it's working for me. I've got a bit of a financial buffer. My partner's on side, or my parents, or whoever's going to be affected. That's it. I'm just going to make the leap. And they decide to quit and hope for the best. Hopefully they've got a plan, so they're not just, ooh, let's hope this works out, but they actually have a plan in place that they're then going to implement.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? That there's the well, you've been able to kind of put people into buckets in some respects. That's a bit of a trite term, so apologies for that. But essentially into categories, let's say, following conversations that you've had with them.
Yeah.
And also say, like, these are kind of some of your options. It's also really interesting to see that, people might come to you and they just need to vent and get it off their chest and communicate and just say, this is frustrating me, or that's frustrating me. And maybe it's just about holding up a mirror and say, well, should it be frustrating you? Like, or is it really that big a problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything, the thing I know about business and our career is that everything is temporary.
Yes.
Everything is changing all the time, especially if you're in a larger organization like I am. Things change all the time. People change all the time.
Yeah.
The process changes for this or that. The manager changes for this or that. There is constant change.
Yeah.
Very rarely do you stay in the same situation year after year after year. There's always change.
It's so true.
So,
yeah.
Sometimes, it's just I often think about this. It sometimes can be just a temporary moment of frustration.
Yeah.
How much do you think it's down to, like, when people want to change? Is it down to the people that's around them or their manager?
I think that has a massive, massive role to play. I used to joke about this, but I think it's true that I always felt that you could do the worst job in the world if you're surrounded by like-minded people. Then it makes the job so much easier. Not to say that there wouldn't be any frustrations, but I think the people that you surround yourself by, I mean, I have a whole chapter in my book around, about the environment that you're in and how that can affect how you feel about your job. And definitely I see people stay in their job just for that community, even though they perhaps don't like their job or they're not getting a huge amount of fulfillment out of it. Just the fact that they've got a group of people that whose company they really enjoy, they end up staying for way longer than you might expect. So yeah, it has a massive, massive impact.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's the environment, the people you're around, whether it's your manager or just your colleagues within the team,
Yeah.
how they are and how they treat you, and that's going to have a massive impact on what you think about it. Because quite often, which I've been in this software industry for the last 20 years, the role actually is similar.
Yes.
You're selling software, talking to customers, but it's just the people around it are actually make the environment and the business completely different.
Yeah. And that's why there's so much conversation around culture within companies and leadership and how you lead effectively. That, it's a topic that's talked about all day, every day. I mean, certainly in my world it is, but it's something that that companies, especially large companies, invest a lot of money in trying to get the culture right, because they want to retain good people and they want good people to feel like, we talk about psychological safety, that people feel that they can feel safe in their working environment and that they can feel like they can contribute their ideas without being shot down. So yeah, it's a huge, huge thing.
Of the people that come to you, how much of the conversation is around the people around them and the manager and those sorts of things? Do they actually want a career change, or are they just frustrated with where they are?
It can be both, really honestly. More than colleagues, I would say managers is a huge, huge one that comes up, because often people get promoted into roles because they're really good at what they do, and not necessarily, not always, but in some cases they're being promoted because they're good at their job, and that seems like the next step is to promote them into a managerial role. But some people are really good at their job and they're not very good at managing people. And so it's completely counterproductive to promote somebody who's good at their job into a managerial role just to give them a promotion. And that's really up to HR and, senior management to work out, well, okay, just because Simon's really good at his job and we want to reward him for having been here for 5 years and doing a really good job, just because we want to reward him doesn't automatically mean we should make him a manager. I think management and leadership requires different skills sometimes to the ones that might be displayed by people who are just really good at their jobs.
Isn't it interesting that there's whether it's human evolution or just the natural growth that we want in our careers, there's kind of a tendency to say, to move into leadership or move to become a manager, to become a director, to move up the ladder.
Yeah.
And then you're probably faced with something quite stark in some respects, which is, okay, but now you've got 7 people to lead.
Yeah.
And you're not doing any of the things that allowed you to get there in the first place. And actually what you are is a middle manager, and you can find that you're in a completely different world altogether.
Yeah, it is completely different, requiring a whole different set of skills. And often I see people being put into managerial positions without any kind of training. That it's literally one day to the next, Simon, here's a team of 5 people, off you go. And expecting that it's like throwing somebody into a swimming pool who's never been in a pool before and gone, okay, now swim, good luck. And if you drown, we might rescue you.
Not before everybody leaves. That's the problem. Yeah.
It's called the Peter Principle, as it's a known thing that, gets talked about quite a lot, but often doesn't get acted upon.
The Peter
Principle. Yeah.
Okay, you can talk that through. What's that?
Well, that's where you promote people into managerial roles because you want to promote them. And, it's a double whammy because you're taking somebody who's really good at their job out of that role, putting somebody in that might be less good at that, and putting them into a managerial role, which they might really suck at. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, I can see that there's lots of, and then what we're talking about here is that managers potentially are inexperienced. They were great at their jobs, but they're now inexperienced in their new job. Maybe they haven't had the adequate level of training, and now they've got 4, 5, 6, 7 people to look after, be responsible for, to advocate for. And that what we're really talking about is actually the impact on the employees when you might not now have a manager who's sufficient at their job.
Yeah.
And then people are getting frustrated at their manager.
Yeah.
It's like you're going round. It's a whole circle, a whole loop of it.
Yes. Well, I mean, conversely, the opposite can be true, that you promote somebody into a managerial role and they are really good at the job and they end up getting the most out of all their team members. That happens too. We're painting a very bleak picture, but I've definitely, obviously that happens as well, that, somebody who's maybe not that great at their role, but actually give them more responsibility and give them people responsibility, and they flourish. So it's not always as bleak as we're maybe painting the picture as, but there are advantages to putting people in managerial roles that maybe haven't got the experience, but once they're trained, they relish in the fact that they've got more responsibility and like leading people and are good at it.
Yeah, I must admit, I have a leadership role and I love it. I absolutely love the people that I'm responsible for, and I'll do anything for them.
Yeah.
And, I think they're great people, and, I really love that part of the job, like, really leaning in to support them in whatever is needed or required.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate because I have knowledge of the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore I kind of feel like it's a great place to be. But I know not all people have that kind of relationship with a manager where they can feel like they have psychological safety, or that it's approachable. You can have conversations, you can be coached, and both ways, by the way. I love it when my team coach me back and go, actually, the way we should approach this is this. I'm like, cool. I'm glad you've got the answers because, and I'll be clear, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
Um,
Did
so
you receive training then when you were promoted to manager?
tricky question that.
Okay. You want to avoid answering it.
Well, it's because when I moved first into leadership, I was working at a startup, and it was my idea to build a team. And they said, okay, that's a great idea. This is the team I think we need to build, which was a team of business development professionals to create opportunity, to create pipeline for the sales team. And they said, okay, go for it. I was in a startup at the time. This is about 10 years ago now. I was in a startup at the time, but there wouldn't have been budget for those sorts of things. So a lot of, we were very much had cost pressures, and I understood that. I just had to be confident in my own ability, and I had done lots of coaching prior to that. So a lot of the learnings that I had to do was self-taught, self-training. There's loads on LinkedIn. There's loads on YouTube.
Yeah.
And listening, mainly listening to the people. But because I have subject matter knowledge of the thing, like I was able to give a lot of guidance and coaching. Yeah. So I felt like it was just about me learning how to communicate what I knew.
Yeah.
Which was a challenge at the beginning, because I was like, I'm 20 years in, or by then 15 years into a career. I can't remember how long I was then. And now I'm trying to explain something complex to someone who's just started and they're a month into their career. So, but that's really different to how I work with my team now. And some of the guys that in my team are 20 or 30 years into their career. So it's a completely different conversation.
Okay. But it sounds like you really love it. And I think that's part of it. If you enjoy it, then naturally perhaps you will, even if the company isn't offering you training as such, if you're motivated, self-motivated, then you'll go and do that learning yourself. Because there's no lack of information, is there? We've got all the information at our fingertips. Like you say, you've got hours and hours of tutorials on YouTube, podcasts, etc., books, endless number of books. It's just whether you're inclined to go and educate yourself, really.
Yeah, and I will, that was a business 10 years ago. Yeah. So I will say that the business I'm in now, Oracle, have a world of training. World of training. I did 2 hours of training this morning on adaptability and leadership. So it's absolutely exceptional, the training Amazing. That we have there. So let's bring the conversation back to your book, because I know I'm thinking about the chapters, and maybe we can go through some of them. So I think some of this, you've got some great frameworks in there. So we've kind of talked about where are you now, like what's your current thinking, and is it your boss, is it kind of that sort of, so we've discussed that. And I think part 3 and part 4 we're talking about rediscovering you and the design. I like this because I often think about the future me and the future us, and where are we going to, what's the future hold, because I feel quite optimistic about the future, quite hopeful. So maybe you could break that down for us. There's quite a some great bits in here about rediscovering you, what do you really want, and then what's your life, what's your design of your life, what do you want it to look and feel like. So I love those chapters.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed them. Yeah, I work mainly, not exclusively, but mainly with middle-aged people. So people who've got 15, 20 years experience in whatever field they went into as a young person. And often the most simple questions that I ask people, I get sort of a blank look. So questions like, what brings you joy? What do you do for fun? What did you used to love doing as a kid? What's your definition of success? These sound like really simple questions, and yet a lot of us reaching middle age, I'm saying us, I'm just assuming, just based on the fact that you said you've got 15, 20 years under your belt, I'm just assuming we're a similar age. But a lot of us in middle age, because of the fact that we've spent a lot of time and effort on our career, and then for a lot of us, children in the mix as well, you sort of lose yourself a little bit in that, and you forget what the things are that used just loved doing as a kid or as a, young adult. When you had time to do fun things, you're just going through the motions of getting up, get the kids ready, get to work, come back, have dinner, chill, go to bed, repeat. And there's not much room left for the stuff that we really love to do. And so I really love with my clients going through, okay, well, let's rediscover who you are. Let's rediscover what makes you tick. Let's rediscover what feels easy and natural to you, but to the person next to you would be really scary. Like, somebody I was working with, he loves doing videos, and he'll literally pick up his phone and he'll just do a video of himself talking about his preferred topic. To a lot of people, that's really scary, but he's like, what's the problem? It's just, it's easy. I just pick up the phone. Blah, blah, blah. And it's recognizing those things that feel really easy and natural and intrinsic to us, that to the next person would be totally like, oh God, I'd rather die than stand up in front of 1,000 people and do a talk, or, whatever it might be. So it's really just reconnecting with those things that we just like to do. And one of the exercises I get people to do is to just keep record of the things at the end of each day, just to spend a couple of minutes and just jot down the things that day that you did that made you feel in the flow, that made you feel alive, that made you feel, I don't know, joyous. Because if we're always, and we tend to, as human beings, we tend to focus on all the negatives. We're like, oh God, I argued with that colleague, and I asked my manager if they would do my review, and they still haven't, and like all these tiny little frustrations that none of them are life-threatening, but all these tiny little frustrations build up and can lead to a really crap day. And if we can have that mindset shift and go, right, today I'm just going to focus on and notice all the good things that are happening. And it does something really interesting to your brain that if you start doing that over time, you've kind of retrained your brain to focus on all the good things and to notice all the good things. And that then gives you a really good clue into what you should be spending more time doing going forward. So I know for you said that you've always loved presenting, and look at you now. I think it's let me throw the question back to you. How did you come, I'm hopefully using the right words, come back to this love of presenting?
Great question. It's interesting, isn't it? So funny if I have a coach, and having a good chat with him last night about this. So you're talking about the things that, what did you naturally do? Funny enough, I wrote about this, funny enough, in my book, actually. Here we go. Yeah. There's a shameless plug. Yeah.
What's the book called?
It's called Are You Lost in Your Shit?
All right.
It's a little bit about overwhelm, anxiety, overthinking, but also like, where have you got to? Where have you ended up in your life? Like, are you where you're supposed to be? And the thing that it's almost like a journal and a note to myself, really, in some respect, to kind of, it's the book I wrote it for myself, for when, if I was a 25-year-old, things I'd wish I'd known now. Now I'm 44. I think if I'd known these things 20 years ago, what would be different for me? So I kind of wrote it to myself in some respects. But one of the things I think about, which is aligned to your question, which is what happened when I left college at 18. I went to America. Right. And I lived in America for 5 years. And I used to work for a cruise line company called Carnival Cruise Lines. Yeah. And I used to be a presenter. I used to host game shows. Crazy, irrelevant, hilarious, the men's sexy legs competition, the men's hairy chest competition, like, really red coat type stuff. But I absolutely loved it. I really did. And I would compare in the evenings for like the late night comedians, the headliner acts, all those sorts of things. It's a brilliant job. I really, I often think so fondly about it. And then when I came back from the cruise ships, and I was mid-20s, and I thought I need a career. And I did try and get into presenting then, but it just didn't quite happen for me. There wasn't a lot going on at the time. This was before the internet, by the way, if you can believe that. So it was very hard to get contacts. I'm mid-20s, I kind of feel like I need to get into a career or need to happen. And I kind of found my way into sales.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I'll do this for a few years. And here I am about 20 years later, actually rediscovering exactly all the things that I used to love, and loved for a good 5 or 6 years after I finished college. And at college I did media. So I always wanted to work in television and do presenting. So for me, this podcast, a lot is about reconnecting to who I was, and gives me an opportunity where I can just do this for the rest of my life. I'm so happy doing it.
Yeah.
And I love getting to speak to really interesting people like yourself.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love that you obviously took the time to think about it and just analyze, where was I? How have I ended up here? And how can I go back there? A lady I was talking to the other day, she was always really interested in sustainability, and she studied it at university, and then, similar to you, fell into a job, a finance job, and did that, really successfully, by the way. She was really good at what she did that for quite a few years. And then only recently went, hang on a tick, what am I doing? Why am I in finance? This was never the plan. And she quit recently to pursue a role in sustainability. But it's funny how we sort of squish the things that light us up when we're younger, and we sort of put it on the side burner, and we just don't know, and then we forget about them. Like a guy I interviewed for my podcast recently, he always wanted to be in the coffee business. He just loved everything about coffee. And he then got a job with Formula One, which he enjoyed. And again, he was good at it. He did well. But he put his dream of doing something with coffee on the shelf because his dad said to him, "Come on, son, you've got to get a proper job." And so he did. Well, he did what was considered a proper job until he was like, hang on, I'm now middle-aged. I don't really want to be doing this job any longer. I really want to go back to doing coffee. Not going back. He'd never actually done it, but he wanted to see if he could do something with coffee. He now runs a really successful coffee roasting business, and he's never looked back. But it's really just about spending that time and peeling back the layers a little bit and going, what was it that I used to really enjoy as a kid?
What do you think it is about midlife? Because I speak to a good number of people about the midlife changes that they're going through. And I speak to my coach about it. There's a lot of people that I know that are thinking about something different, or they've been on my podcast and they've talked about their changes. What do you think it is about midlife?
Well, I mean, there's the cliche, isn't there? The midlife crisis. And, I don't know the full psychology behind it. And there's probably, somebody could explain this much more succinctly and based on a lot more research than me. But in my experience, it's to do with the fact that so often I did a bit of a survey, and I can't actually remember the exact numbers now, but a huge proportion of people accidentally fall into their careers. A bit like you said, you fall into sales or finance or whatever. You sort of fall into doing a career that from the outside looks stable and well paid and respected and so on. And I think when you've done it for 15, 20 years, there is a shift in midlife. For women, it's the perimenopause. And for men, maybe it's a hormonal thing as well. I'm not entirely sure of the science. But there does come that point where you've sort of worked. I think it's sort of expected, isn't it? Societal expectation that in your 20s and 30s you work, and then you get married and you buy the house, and you sort of, that's the societal norm, if you like, to pursue a career. And then I think once you've ticked a lot of those boxes and the kids have come along, and then you suddenly go, okay, tick, 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 tick. I've done all these things that the society sort of expects of me, but bloody hell, I'm unhappy. And, and I say that my husband always goes, you make it sound so negative, but trust me, the clients that I'm working with are miserable as hell, some of them, and they're really unhappy and they're really stressed out and they're really burnt out. And a guy recently, his wife said to me, about him, that he'd been in hospital for an operation, and the day that he was due to leave hospital, and then he was going to be going back the next day, he said to his wife, "I'd rather stay in hospital than go back to work tomorrow." So, as much as my husband tells me off for being, sounding dramatic about it, it is dramatic. And I'm not being over dramatic about it. I really see all these cases where people have complete mental and physical breakdowns because of their work and the pressure that work puts on them.
Yeah, I did, by the way.
Did
So
you?
that's what my book was about. Are you lost in your shit? Because I went through, this is a while ago now, so it's about 5 years ago. But for about 2 to 3 years, I went through a real deep depression, and I really never knew what it was about. I talked about this a few times in the podcast, but like if you think about the psychology of Maslow, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, well, hang on a minute. I mean, I knew about Maslow back in my 20s, and I
Yes.
thought, okay, this is a great pyramid to give me some guidance on what to focus around. So, I focused on earning some money so I could have the house, and earning some money so I had, the shelter and all those sorts of things. And then, along the journey, I've met my wife, and that, my turned into my wife, of course. And then, then we've had children, and that's all wonderful and beautiful. And here I am at the top of my career. Why am I so unhappy?
Yeah.
I've done everything Maslow told me to do.
Yeah.
I'm here. I have belonging. I'm self-actualized. Why am I depressed? So, that kind of unraveled over a number of years, and I've kind of now been able to understand, which is a lot of people in their midlives go through this, and it's an interesting thing because you could say midlife crisis. I like to think of it as a midlife awakening.
Yeah.
Awakening.
Yeah.
It's your
It's a much more
intuition
positive way to put it.
Yeah, but it's your intuition telling you there's something else for you here.
Yeah.
You need to wake up. And that's why I like to think of it as an awakening.
Yeah.
Because you can look at it and go, what's this trying to tell me?
Yeah.
What is it? Like, you've made it to the top of something. Maybe you were built for more. And I feel like there's around the midlife, there's a lot of people that are looking at changes, because you're also, looking at the next 20, 25 years of your career and thinking, well, what do I really want? What do I really want?
Yeah.
What's important to me?
Yeah. In my book, I talk about the be, do, have, and then give. So it's a framework that's used a lot in coaching. So be a certain way so that you can carry out things in a certain way so that you can have certain things. So it's the be, do, have. And then for me, the fourth and most important element is give. How can I give back? Because I think in our 20s and 30s and sometimes our 40s, it's all about what can I take? What can I get from this? The promotion, the money, the prestige, the identity. Take. And, it's not a secret that if you're just focused on yourself and getting stuff for yourself, that's maybe exciting in the beginning, and then after a while it wears thin and it's actually not that much fun anymore. And then the way that we get fulfillment often is to give back. So it could be, I mean, you said it earlier, so giving back to, by mentoring other people within your company. It can be volunteering. It can be, I don't know, buying the shopping for the lady across the road once a week. That feeling of, oh, I've really made somebody's day today is, from my experience, but also from what I've then seen with clients, that element of doing something good for somebody else is so satisfying. It's so much more satisfying than buying yourself the latest Louis Vuitton handbag, like buy a billion. But it takes us a while to realize that. And often that shift can happen in your 40s and 50s, that sort of little awakening.
So if I love that. I really love that. So someone's kind of on the edge and they're thinking, oh, I am unhappy. Can't really put my finger on it. I feel a bit discontented. What we've talked about so far is analyzing where you are. And we talked about the different frameworks of kind of what type of person are you? Are you someone who's going to stay? Are you going to think about leaving? Are you going to dip your toe? Are you going to go full flow and jump into it? one of the things that you talk about here, I think, is around mindset and getting your body right. It'd be great for you to kind of go into those a little bit to make sure that, there might be things that we can be doing to, I always think about this, to validate our thinking.
Yeah.
Like, am I thinking in the right way?
Yeah.
That's also one of the reasons why I love working with a coach, by the way, because they can hold up a mirror and go, you're off here, or you're right here, etc. But when you're talking about it's all in your mind and it's about your body, what are you thinking about?
Yeah. So as I was writing these chapters, I was like, I can just see that there's going to be some skeptics that go, why the hell is Yesim talking about meditation and eating well and sleeping well? And this is a book about careers. But for me, it's such a, I take a very holistic approach to careers, because you can't extract yourself from your career. You are your career. Your career is you if you have a career, and I think really good decision making, because ultimately the book is designed to help you to make a really good decision for you, and it's really hard to make a good decision if you've not slept well. If you've only had 3 hours of interrupted sleep, you're probably going to choose the chocolate bar over the fruit salad, and it's so, and that's a simple example. But if you have poor sleep over prolonged periods, I mean, you'd be silly not to work out that is probably going to affect how you turn up at work. And sometimes, genuinely, sometimes for some clients, it's as simple as fixing their sleeping habits. They've come to me with wanting to make a career change, but we look, because it's very holistic, we look at, well, are you sleeping well? Because if you are turning up to work with 5 hours interrupted sleep, you're probably going to be not quite yourself. You're probably going to be a slightly grumpier version of yourself. You're going to make decisions much more slowly and perhaps more poorly. And I don't know, you might not be a particularly pleasant person to be around, and you're going to potentially make mistakes where, the optimized version of you wouldn't. So that's why I really do talk a lot about sleep, exercise. I mean, exercise, I don't need to tell the average person that exercise is really good for you. It's really good for your brain. It makes you feel more positive. It releases all sorts of endorphin, hormones that make you feel better. And so if you turn up to work, having gone to the gym in the morning and having had 8 hours sleep, versus somebody who's had very little sleep and hasn't exercised for 6 years, can you see what I mean? Like, you're going to turn up as a very, very different person, and you're going to be perceived by people around you in a very, very different way. So fixing all these elements that seemingly have nothing to do with your job or your career can have a massive, massive effect on how you show up and how well you do and how you feel about your work ultimately.
Such interesting, isn't it? And interesting for you, because these are things that you can be doing before the day starts,
Yes.
or so it's just getting your preparation for work in the right way is ultimately going to define how your day is going to be. I think it's an interesting point, a really interesting point, because I'll give you a personal example. So as you're aware, we've just had a baby.
Yes.
And my boss contacted me, 2 or 3 weeks after the baby, and he was like, "You're a bit snappy. What's going on?" And I was like, "You're aware I've just had a baby, right?" And I wasn't doing so well, although I'm very happy in my role. But he was like, "Yeah, I can see what's going on." I was like, "Yeah, I've just had a baby. I haven't slept for 3 weeks. Like, I'm trying to do the feeds." And also because of that, I was also missing the gym because I needed to sleep in slightly, and all those things. And from someone who prior to that, 3 or 4 weeks before, had a great routine, right? Going to the gym, doing all those things, but just taking sleep out for whatever reason. This is why I always think about why a manager should ask the right questions of what's going on behind what I'm seeing. Even then I was like, I feel like I'm 20% of the man that I was.
And you probably were.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
exactly. And just because of that. But during that time, what I'd noticed, everything was triggering me. Everything
yeah,
was frustrating me.
yeah,
The email was frustrating me.
yeah,
Whereas a lot of things normally, because I meditate as well, I'd be quite calm around.
yeah.
I'm like, it doesn't matter that much. This doesn't matter. There's going to be things that always are happening. But it's interesting talking about your point, and that my direct example is the sleep, which I was previously really focused around having great sleep hygiene. As soon as we had the baby, that's completely changed. Of course, it's changed because we have a baby,
Mm.
but then there's an immediate impact to work, an
Mm.
immediate impact.
Immediate, yeah, immediate. And it's the same with food. You know, if I go and have a very carby, starchy lunch with maybe a glass of wine, like they do in on the continent in some countries, and then I go back to work in the afternoon, probably going to be slightly less productive and motivated than I was pre having, you know, very heavy lunch. That's then going to make me feel tired in the afternoon. So it's all these little things, isn't it, that have such a massive impact, and we don't really stop to consider how all these tiny little things can impact how we show up at work.
Where do you think meditation comes into this?
Yeah, you know, well, you've read the book, so you know I'm a huge fan of meditation. You know, the first time I ever tried it, I was like, my mum and I, we we're talking 20 years ago. We had like a meditation CD as it was back then. And I remember both sitting in my living room going, "Oh, let's try this," and then just giggling throughout the whole thing. And I really thought, oh, this is a little bit woo-woo. And then probably 10 years ago, I rediscovered meditation. I was like, I'm just going to give this a bit of a go. And the effect that it can have on you, I think, is incredible. So anybody who's done meditation or he does it on a regular basis, you know, I'm you know, I'm talking to the converted, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But anybody who hasn't tried it, who thinks it's just woo woo, it's something that hippies do, um, I really urge people to try it, because there's so much research now around that, you know, that there wasn't 20 years ago. There's so much research now about how positively it can affect your brain and your mood and your outlook on life, that it just seems like a very low hanging fruit that can really have a massive impact. And so it seems silly not to at least try it. And it doesn't have to take long. You don't have to sit cross-legged under a tree in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you can do it on the train. You can do it on the commute, on the way to work, you know. Please don't do it while you're driving. But if you're literally sitting on a train or you're a passenger, stick your headphones in. There's loads of apps that, you know, some of them are free even. Stick an app in your ear and just, you know, do some conscious breathing. Just focus on the breathing, clear the mind. It makes you more creative. It makes you calmer. It makes you more in tune with your intuition. It will only have a positive. It isn't. I don't think there's any way meditation can have a negative effect on you.
Yeah, you are preaching to the converted.
Yeah,
I talk about it a lot in my book as well. And it's been the biggest, most transformational thing that I've done in the last 3 to 4 to 5 years.
yeah,
Um, it's completely changed my life of how I feel about things and who I am, and also connecting with your inner soul, your intuition.
yeah.
And it's just a win everywhere. It's a win for you personally and how you show up and how you feel. It's a win for all the people around you, and the biggest win is for your family.
Yes.
Like, so when you go home to them, like, you're far more in tune. You're just a better person,
Yeah.
period. Like, I wish everyone would meditate.
Yeah.
You know, it's just probably the most important thing, one of the most foundational things you could possibly do for, like, for an investment of 10 minutes and
Yeah.
nearly no, and, you know, other than an app, maybe you can even just use YouTube. I used YouTube this morning.
Yeah.
Like, it's a win, 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 win for
Totally.
everybody.
Totally. Totally. I totally agree.
Mm. What do you feel about, because what this also leads on to is exploring what's possible. And I
Mm.
like how you've linked this in the book, because when I meditate, so the meditation I had this morning was a manifestation and a visualization, and it talked about where do you see yourself, what are you thinking about, like what does it feel like to be in that moment, what is the moment. and I've done lots of these meditations over the years. I really enjoy those types, very visual. Like when you're connecting the meditation with exploring what's possible, what are you thinking about there? Because for me, that's how I like to link it. So I loved how you wrote it in the book.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, if you've been in the same career for 15, 20 years, it's hard to imagine what your life might look like outside of what you're used to. It's I have a tiny little story in my book about it's a common story, so your listeners might have heard this one already. It's about the elephant the baby elephant that's tied up with a tiny bit of rope and a stick, and as the elephant grows, obviously the elephant could pull the rope and the stick out because it's become so much stronger. But it doesn't even occur to the elephant that it could do that because it's so used to being confined by this bit of rope, flimsy rope and stick. And I use that story because I think we're really guilty of that. We get used to the conditions that we've had in the past, or even in the present, and we can't imagine that we might have outgrown a situation or a job or a relationship. That's a whole different subject, but sometimes working with a coach helps, obviously, with that, to, exactly like you say, hold the mirror up and go, yes, this was great for you for the last 10, 15 years, but you've outgrown this now. You've transcended that, and now let's look at what might be possible for you going forwards. And you can do this by yourself, for sure you can, and people have, but it's so much easier to do it with somebody who's non-judgmental, who hasn't got a hidden agenda. So, or maybe not even a hidden agenda, they just have their own agenda. So if you're talking it through with a partner, they're going to come at it, they might come at it with all the love in the world, but they're going to come at it with their experience and their expectations of you and their expectations of what your life together is going to look like, for very good reason. But having that conversation with somebody who's completely impartial, who hasn't got anything to gain from what the outcome is going to be ultimately, is really, really powerful, because it allows you that space, that permission to go, do you know what? I've always had this dream of being a TV presenter. Or, one of my clients, she's now working on, she's an engineer, but she's always been really interested in coral reef. And she's now volunteering in that area for now. She's a toe dipper. But, but you a lot of us feel like we need permission from somebody to go after that thing that we're secretly wanting to do, but we haven't quite got the courage to voice it and then go for it.
Where does fear come into that?
I mean, fears, we have fears for really obvious reasons. Fears keep us alive. Fears stop us from walking out into the road and doing crazy things. Fears are there for really good reason. And that's why the human race has survived as long as it has. But fear can be detrimental if it's stopping us from doing stuff that appears scary, but actually when you break it down and you have a sensible plan in place, can be really exciting. So I love unpacking people's fears, because our fears are just based on thoughts and stories and beliefs that we have. And sometimes those beliefs are based on things that other people are scared of. If you had a parent that was always saying to you, oh, be careful, don't do this, don't do that, oh, don't take risks, then there's a good chance you're going to grow up as an adult as somebody that is very scared of taking any kind of risk. Or if you had a teacher that said to you, like, we're influenced, especially when we're little, we're influenced subconsciously by all these things that we're exposed to, things that people have said to us, experiences that have happened. I mean, I heard, and again, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I'm going to repeat it anyway because it's a good story. But I feel like it's probably true. I was listening to somebody talk about a psychologist, so she wasn't just anybody, psychologist talking about um, women who are fearful of having children, of giving birth, let's say. And when they unpacked it, for some women, it went back to the fact that when they were babies themselves, in the first few days, when the mother was recalling the birth experience to friends, family, anybody who came to see the newborn, and was recalling a bad birthing experience, like, oh, it was awful, and then the doctors, and then I almost died, and the baby almost died, and you're recalling this story, and it's a baby, right? The baby can't communicate, but the baby's absorbing all this information and is being planted in their subconscious. And then 30 years later, the partner goes, hey, let's have kids. And she says, I don't want kids. I'm scared of, I'm scared of having kids. And you, well, that's not very logical. Women have babies all day, every day. What's the problem? But it was because this thing was planted. So, that might be an extreme example, but we absorb other people's fears. We take them on as our own. And it's only when we stop to really just break them down and go, I do have a fear around that. Is that a fear that's serving me, or is it hindering me? Can I challenge that fear in a really good way and replace that fear with a feeling of excitement or what might be possible? Then that's transformative.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're talking about all the possibilities and the optimism that you could have, and if you were to think about changing careers. But I often think about then the fear of change, then it creates procrastination, and I'll stay being comfortable, but a bit unhappy. But it's not that bad. It's okay. Yeah. You kind of like set in like a lower vibration or a lower energy of what your possible potential is, because you're not, you've got responsibilities, you've got the house and the partner, and but if I was going to do it, I should have done it 10 years ago, and the excuses. And I bet, and it's interesting what you talk about, because you probably need to work with someone to unpack a lot of those. They've come to you because they want the advice, the guidance, the support. I wonder how many people stay in procrastination.
Lots of people, and I do try to help them out of that. And one way to do that is to take little steps and make little changes and little adjustments. And one of the exercises I get people to do is get out of that comfort zone. Like you mentioned, the comfort zone. And our brain loves a comfort zone because you're safe there. It's all predictable. You know what's going to happen. And so your brain's like, this is great. Just stay here. Thanks very much. But by just doing little things, like things that feel a little bit uncomfortable, but on a logical level that you're going to be safe. So, it could be something as simple as turning to the person in the queue in the post office next to you that you wouldn't normally strike up a conversation because it's uncomfortable, especially if you're English. We're quite reserved. We don't really like talking to strangers. I'll just stare at my screen instead. So if that's uncomfortable to you, but you know that you're not going to die if you speak to the person behind you, then maybe just try that. Just turn around and go, this queue's taking a bit longer than usual, or it's a lovely day today, or whatever. Something could be something completely mundane, and you just never know. You never know who that person might turn out to be your next partner in life, or your next boss, or I don't know, a client, or whatever. But I really encourage people. Part of the homework that I set people is to just do things that feel out of your comfort zone. And it can be something small or it can be something big, depending on what your threshold for feeling uncomfortable is. But you sort of have to get comfortable with feeling a little bit uncomfortable if you really want to make a change.
Yeah, because you do have to really lean into it.
Yeah.
I think, don't you? You have to, because it can't really be. It's interesting because you mentioned about the toe dipper.
Yeah.
And that's good, but ultimately there's going to have to become a point where you're going to have to commit.
Yes. And that,
And
for people who are really very, very risk averse, I'm never going to say just quit. You'll be fine. Not in a million years would I say that. And I don't tend to give advice anyway. I tend to ask questions so people come to their own conclusions. But what I would encourage people to do is put all the foundations in place to prove, like, if you want to set up your own business, for example, by all means, set up everything you need to do while you're still employed. I mean, I think that's a dream scenario. You've got the stability of an income and you've got the excitement of creating a new business that really interests you. And I mean, the examples of people who've done this is endless, endless, endless. Somebody that worked for me, actually, she runs a translation business, which she started while she was working for me, and I was aware of it and really happy for her to do that, which I know some bosses aren't, but I'm all for entrepreneurship. So I was like, awesome, go for it. And she built up the business very gradually. So she was working weekends, evenings, whenever time allowed. And then it came to a tipping. Don't know what.
apologies, I didn't mean to do that. So it's an
That's okay.
accident. Please continue with your story.
Yeah, and then that you get to that tipping point where you earning enough income from this side hustle to go, actually, this is now a proven business. It's likely to bring me income in the future. Now I feel safe to quit this job. So if you want to be really safe about it, or, start applying for jobs in an area that interests you or in a different company or whatever, while you're still employed, it's much, much easier. If you're going from one job to another, it's much easier to get new employment when you're still employed. So I would never say to anybody, quit your job and then hope for the best and start applying once you've quit, unless it's really a dire situation. It's always easier and less stressful to find a job while you're still employed.
Also, you're coming from a point of strength,
Mm-hmm.
because when you have a job, it's completely different to if you don't have a job and then you need a job.
Yes.
So if you really want the change, that's a great place to be, and
Mm-hmm.
you're coming from a point of strength, which is, it's my decision.
Yes.
But if you've gone 3 or 4 months, 6 months without a job, and now you're thinking, actually, my cash is beginning to run out,
Yeah.
and the bills are beginning to mount up, and now I feel under a different type of pressure, which is a money pressure.
Yeah.
You might end up just going back into the same career because it's safety,
Yes.
and thinking, oh, do you know what? That hasn't quite worked out for me. So
Yeah.
so I always feel like the position of strength is when you are earning,
Yeah.
and either to dip your toe,
Yeah.
or I like to think of it as just build some evidence,
Yes.
especially if it's something completely
Definitely.
brand new or a career. Like, what's the evidence?
Yeah.
What can you do? I mean, obviously yourself, you're an author.
Yeah.
You can start writing, you can start doing your poetry, whatever it is. What can you do with
Yeah.
the internet now, with social media? Is there a way of building something on the side, a few hours a day, and also, by the way, you might start doing it and realize you don't enjoy it that much.
100% that. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because people do that. They go, oh, I'm going to go on this course because I want to upskill in this area that really interests me. And they do the course and they go, God, I'm so glad I didn't quit my job for this because I don't enjoy it. But unless you've tried it, you don't know.
I really loved talking to you today. It's been a really great conversation. So thank you so much for it. In conclusion, so I know you have a conclusion part of your book. Maybe you could wrap it all up together for us. What did you talk about in your conclusion in your book?
So go back to the 4 outcomes, and whichever outcome, whichever conclusion you come to is fine, and it might be that you're a Remainer today and a toe dipper tomorrow. Things change, we change, circumstances change, our commitments change, our financial situation changes, our definition of success changes over time. So it's not a finite situation. Whatever you decide, it's not the end, it's just the next step. And that's, I think, for me, the fun bit is you might have decided that, okay, you're just going to tweak your job for now, but it might be that in a month's time you come across a hobby that you're like, this is really fun. Can I turn this into my full-time profession? And then you're open to exploring again. But I'm like a child. You can tell. Like I get really excited at when people. Can I tell a really quick story? Have we
Please
got
do,
time?
please. Yes, absolutely,
And
absolutely,
I
please.
talk about it in my book as well. But my dad, he was a hotel manager all his life. Obviously quite high pressured, very long working hours. We used to live in when he rose to being a hotel manager, we used to live in the hotel, and he'd get a call at 10 o'clock at night saying, the minister of blah blah has just arrived. Can you please come down? And he'd have to get out of his pajamas into his suit and go and greet the minister of whatever. And it's not a job. It's part of you are a hotel manager is like your identity. Anyway, so he did that for many years, but he'd always been really arty. And I remember when I was young, he used to do lots of painting and creative stuff, which then he just didn't have time for 4 decades probably. And when he retired, I mean, he still works, but when he sort of semi-retired and he had a lot more time on his hands, he rediscovered his love for creative arts, and he went to this pottery course. It's like a free pottery course for retired people that he went along to one day, and it completely and utterly captured his imagination. So he's late 60s by this point, and he's now, we were talking about it just recently, he said to me, do you know what, I go to sleep thinking about what I'm going to do to that pot tomorrow, what color I'm going to paint this bit and what handle I'm going to put on that. And it's all consuming, but like in the best possible way. Anybody who's creative knows that feeling of being completely consumed by this thing that you're creating. It's the best feeling in the world. And he talks about it with so much passion, and then he gets up and he does his thing, and then he did his first exhibition at the age of, I think he was 72, and people completely loved his work, and he sold it by the bucket load. And the point of the story is that you're never too old. People say to me, oh, I'm 45, I'm 50, I'm too old to go after what I want to do. And I'm like, please tell me you're joking. Like until you're underground, you're not too late. It's not too late to explore what lights you up, And I love giving the example of my dad. And I mean, he's one of a gazillion examples probably of people who found what they're really excited about later in life because they finally got the time and they haven't got the financial pressure. But when I asked Dad, would you have wanted to be a potter if you'd discovered this earlier in life? He was like, yeah, that would have been amazing. And he had a great career, and he was good at being a hotel manager, and it served him really well. But the point is, unless you experience lots of different things, you're not going to know what really lights you up. So that's my other homework to people, is like, go on an evening course, go on YouTube and discover something that completely you've had nothing to do with, but that sort of sounds interesting to you. And that helps you to discover what might be your next profession.
Love that story. I love that story. Such a great story, isn't it? Because people can discover new things about themselves, and what a beautiful thing to discover something for yourself that when you're slightly older, right? Something you never thought. Someone who was on my podcast, by the way, at the very beginning, she's a world champion grandmother, powerlifter.
Oh, I love it.
And Louise, and she's going to come back on the podcast soon. And she had no idea that she was into powerlifting. Of course, why would she? Right. And she's like, I need some time for myself. And so I want to get a bit fitter. She started going to the gym. She started training with the same PT I have. And he said, you're strong. You're really strong. Anyway, she went on to break 3 world records as a powerlifter in bench and deadlift, and she absolutely loves it. She'll spend a couple of hours in the gym, like 3 or 4 times a week. It's her time. It's for her. And she's coming on the podcast soon, actually, because it's just such a great story. She was on the podcast years ago when I first started. And it's just, you can discover new things when you get older. And the thing I'll leave you with here is what I think about is that 50 is the new 30, because I think 30 you're still a baby. But when I was 30, I've got, oh God, I'm a man now and all that. Absolutely not. I think at 50 is the new 30.
Yeah.
You know, so I think people in this lifetime are going to live a lot longer.
Yeah.
You know, people when you're getting to 60, that's not that old. There's still stuff, there's still time. And also the thing I'm going to advocate for here is following what is your passion. And it doesn't matter about the outcome and the longer term. And the reason why is because you start to enjoy the journey.
Yes.
I was fearful of even doing this podcast or starting presenting again for maybe what people think and all those sorts of things, or maybe whatever my fears were. But since I started doing it, I've loved the conversations. I've loved every moment of doing it. I'm in flow the whole time, and I get to speak to amazing people.
What helped you overcome your fear?
That's a good question. My own book, actually. I think writing it all down. Yeah, and also thinking about what was my dream. I had a dream, and I forgot about my dream. And also impermanence. You know, I'm thinking about the next 20 or 30 years of my career and what I want to spend my time doing. And it's different now because I'm not thinking so much. Yes, I am thinking about money, but I'm also thinking about just what do I enjoy doing? I want to enjoy my days, you know. So I think, and also I've been through really deep, dark depression because I'm not doing the thing that I'm here meant to do.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing because Jordan Peterson, who you might be aware of, he's a clinical psychologist, and he talks extensively on podcasts. And he says it's your moral responsibility to go after your dreams. And the reason for that is because the options you have is either to enjoy your life or have depression. And he said if you don't enjoy your life and don't go after the things that you're meant to go after, then you're going to be a depressed person for you and all the people around you. And he said society doesn't need another person like that. So it's your moral obligation for you and the people around you to go after what lights you up.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think it's a beautiful thing, and it's an interesting thing to consider. Definitely.
Well, it's the ripple effect, isn't it? That we think, you know, I remember I met a guy he worked for the UN. Like he was hell bent on making the world a better place, which is a really nice obsession to have. But he'd done all this work on himself. And I remember having this conversation with him, and he said, do you know what? I've come to the realization that I can try to make a difference on a big scale. But the realization is now that I make a difference, even say, you know, smiling and saying hello to the person that I pass in the street is going to have an effect on how they feel for the next 5 seconds or 20 seconds or a minute or whatever. And that's that ripple effect. And he said he had been underestimating how much of an impact he can make on the world, not by doing big gestures, just by doing small gestures and just being a good human being. And I think that was, you know, that really stuck with me. And I think it's so true that we have the opportunity to make somebody's day or ruin somebody's day every day. And if you can choose to make somebody's day, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. I love that. I love those. It is about those small things, isn't it? It's really about those small things. If someone wants to know more about you, get in touch or work with you, or if they're thinking about a change or they just want to have a chat, what's the best way of getting in contact?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I think I'm the only Yesim Nicholson in the world. So if you search for my name, I don't know if you put details in the show notes, but
absolutely.
My first name is spelled Yesim, and Nicholson, and my website is like opposite of no, careercoaching.com. I've got quite a lot of free resources on my website. So if somebody's like, I really like what Yesim's saying, but I don't want to spend any money with her, that's totally fine. I'm trying to sort of do my bit and help as many people as possible in different ways. So I've got free resources on the website. If you want to spend a tenner, you can buy my book, Ready to Quit Your Job. It's available on Amazon worldwide. And there's a workbook which is on my website, which is free to download for anybody, because as you know, there's loads of exercises throughout the book and loads of things to write down and take note of. So I thought I'll make it really easy for people and create a workbook. There's my podcast, which is Your Big Career Move, where I talk to, I always like to say, ordinary people who've made extraordinary career changes. And then I've created playlists on YouTube to sort of try to make it easy for you to find episodes that might be of interest to particular. So, to chunk down into career change after the age of 30 or 40 or 50, or turning your hobby or passion into a business, or I've got a whole section for teachers because, there are so many teachers needing help. So hopefully, you can find what you're looking for there. And, I run group programs, career change programs regularly that you can find details on my website. And I do some one-to-one coaching as well. And all of that's on my website too.
Loved it. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. It's been great talking to you.
It's been really fun. Thank you for having me.